This is a review of HBM's Crypto-Corner and the Gray Area for last night, that being Wednesday, September 8th, 2010. It was two great shows. HBM's was great. It was a panel discussion on the Patterson Gimlin film with guests Bill Munns, Bill Miller, and Liam, aka Irish Guy. They were the guests, and they brought quite a bit of expertise, their own expertise, to the discussion. Bill Miller, he brought his expertise on the claims of Bob Hieronymus, and also the expertise on the massacre nonsense, which he has written about. And he talked quite a bit about both of those subjects, as did Bill Munns. Bill Munns also talked about how he is still restoring the Patterson Gimlin film to for possible future release on CD or DVD. They'll probably go for a DVD release of some sort, where Mrs. Patterson will just give these superior copies of the film to different media companies, and hopefully we won't see anymore on the documentaries these copies of copies of copies of the film, which tend to take away the sharpness and the clarity of the original film. Anybody who saw the American Paranormal Bigfoot episode saw the tremendous work that Bill Munns has been doing on the restoration of the Patterson Gimlin film, where he took a first generation copy of the film provided to him by Mrs. Patterson and ran it through a projector, a 70-year-old projector, but also photographed each individual frame one at a time with a computer. So that was quite fascinating, quite interesting. Irish guy Liam, Irish guy was on the show, and he talked about his time working for Philip Morris Costumes, and he talked a good bit about the fact that he was pretty familiar with the gorilla costumes that Philip Morris was making at the time, and that they looked nothing like the Patterson Gimlin film. And he says he's actually worn some of those suits, and so those suits get extremely hot inside. Extremely hot, and way back then they didn't have what they now have. They have now the self-cooling suits, but back then they didn't have that. So it would be kind of difficult, if not practically impossible, for someone to, wear a suit like that. And Bill Munns also talked about that he had to wear hot gorilla suits a few times, and that he also one time on the set of Swamp Thing, he had to stand in as a creature, as a monster, as a villainous monster. He had to stand in. So he's had experience with wearing heavy, hot things like that. Anyway, it was a great show, and we really had a good time, all five of us. Bill Green was also on with us, and it was a fun show. The archive is now up at www.blogtalkradio.com/hbms-crypto-corner. Now, we will be back in December with a year in review show. Then after that, we'll probably be back sometime early 2011. But anyway, it was a great show, I thought. I thought it went pretty well. And then over on the Gray Area, the guest was Jim Covell. He is president of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And a fascinating subject he talked about was was capturing small great white sharks, keeping them in captivity for a while, and then releasing them, tagging and releasing them, I should say. They've tagged and released great whites into the Pacific, And Melissa and Monica and their special guest co-host Chris Buddenbaugh were also asking some great questions of Dr. Covell. I called in and I asked Dr. Covell several questions as well. A couple of questions. I asked him if it was safe for somebody, like during the recent Shark Week series of programming. There was one program where a guy got on a sled and had a decoy of a seal behind him on the sled, and the great whites would come up and breach, and they would jump up and grab the or at least bump the faux seal and leap up in the air. And this guy was taking photos of that. Got some great shots. He really got some great photos of these great whites. But I asked Dr. Covell, is there an inherent danger to doing that? He said, not really, unless the shark comes up underneath the sled. If the shark were to come up and breach the sled, I suppose that the sled would probably have to look like a giant seal in order for the shark to breach and bump the sled. But anyway, he said, but as long as that doesn't happen, I guess the guy was pretty safe. And I also asked him what inherent risks there were in capturing great whites. Great whites, of course, are not known for being cooperative when it comes to capture, to being in captivity. They can't be held in captivity for very long. And that's the thing about it. They cannot be held in captivity for very long. Referring to great whites, it seems strange, because most other shark species can be kept in captivity for long periods of time. But there's something about the great white where they just cannot be kept in captivity. And he said, yeah, there are some risks, but as long as you capture the smaller ones and then you release them after a few months, like 2 or 3 months, you may have them in the aquarium, in the tank, and then you release them. You tag and you release them into the ocean. So I thought it was a fascinating show. And the sharks is always a fascinating subject, and I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that I'm not sure who the guest will be for next month. The Gray Area is going to be airing once a month, and it looks like they're going to be branching out beyond Sasquatch and branching out into other interests and other areas, which I think makes for a pretty balanced program. I think, and I think Melissa and Monica did a great job. So did Chris Buddenbaugh. They'll be back next month in October, 9 Eastern, 8 Central, www.blogtalkradio.com/thegrayarea. And then this weekend and Monday, on the weekend, on Sunday, will be Night Callers and Squash Detective Radio. On Night Callers, Lauren, Laurie, and Luke will have as their guest Tony Mehmed, aka Rick Rocket 2010, right here on YouTube. That'll begin at 7 Eastern, 6 Central, www.blogtalkradio.com/nightcallers. And then I'm not sure what Chris or Steve and Chris have planned for Squatch Detective Radio, but it will begin at 8 Eastern, 7 Central, www.blogtalkradio.com/the Squatch Detective. And then finally on Monday night, our good friends Abe and Evie will be back, and they will have a returning guest. As their returning guest, they will have Texlaw Research member Mike Hall. This will be his second visit to the show. That'll begin at 9 Eastern, 8 Central, www.blogtalkradio.com/MNBRT. And as always, we do encourage you to please tune in and support great research.